Welcome, everyone, to the Audit radio show. I'm your host and creator of Audit the Audit, and you can refer to me as John Lang. Before we dive into this broadcast, there's a couple of things I'd like to go over with you all. First, I'm not an auditor or a lawyer, and it is important to keep that in mind throughout this interaction, so to speak. My background is in journalism, and I've been covering the Supreme Court for some time now, and I have a degree in multimedia journalism. So, what I'd like to do is just go over a few simple clarifications before we actually get into taking questions. First, I'd like to tell you please be courteous in the chat. No spamming or all caps or rude behavior. This can and will likely result in a ban. And I'd like to let you know what to expect in future episodes of this broadcast. Each week, we will discuss a different topic relating to First Amendment activism, law enforcement, constitutional rights, and current events. And the show will feature guests from all sides of the constitutional activism community. I want this show to be casual, but I hope that it will also provide some education so that you feel like it's worth your time to be here. Um, and, you know, everything about this show is very subject to change because this is a very experimental project. So please bear with me as I, figure everything out and put together the structure of the show moving forward. First thing I would like to do, I asked some subscribers to submit questions in the community forum of the Audit YouTube channel. And I'm going to go through a few of those questions before I take some questions from the chat. And then I will open up the phone lines if any of you want to call, and I will put the number up here on the screen so that you can see it. And once again, please bear with me. I'm still figuring out all of this technology involved with this type of broadcast. So it may take some time to get everything, working properly. So the first question comes from GapKid94, and it says, to what extent do you think that individuals should be informed about laws, codes, ordinances pertaining to where they live, visit, or pass through? And what do you think is the best way for someone to start going about educating and informing themselves? Well, the first thing I would say is that being educated on your rights is it's very relative. And sometimes knowing your rights or having a surface level understanding of the law and your rights can serve you well. And I always encourage people to gain that type of understanding. But I also think that it can harm you in some circumstances if you have certain misconceptions about the law. And I believe I covered this in one of the recent episodes of Audit the Audit. It's important to know for sure that the points you're making and the notions that you are asserting are right and they're valid. And oftentimes, misconceptions about the law can lead to an arrest and a prosecution, even. So it is important to gain a deep understanding of the law, but also to know how it works practically and know the functionality of it. And as far as what's the best way to go about educating yourself, it really just goes to reading the laws. Every state, pretty much every state, has their laws in an online database. If you were to type in, let's just say, California state statutes into Google, you will get back all of that state's laws. And there's a website called municode.com. It's MUNICODE, that is sort of a database for local laws. So if you're looking for a particular city's ordinances or something like that, you can find that there. Moving on, the picturesque has a couple questions, and I'll just take them one by one. Do you have any plans for the second YouTube channel? Yes, I do have plans for the second YouTube channel. And if you all are not aware, you can go to any of my videos, and there's a link in the description called the Audit 2. That is actually Audit the Audit's second channel, but it is called Lies Via Truth. And I'm planning on, sort of branching out from not just exploring the laws, but also creating more long form documentaries about other topics. So if you enjoy my investigative skills and you like my research methods, be sure to check out that channel, because soon there will be a few long form documentaries. And by long form, I mean, between 40 minutes to an hour, maybe. The picturesque also asks, what type of content is available via Patreon that's not on YouTube? Well, Patreon for me kind of serves as the resting place for all of the videos that YouTube rejects. And if YouTube rejects a video, then I go back and re-edit the video so that it doesn't include, or so that it's not censored. All of the vulgarities and everything that happens is sort of laid on the table. With Audit the Audit, I have to be more careful about what I actually show on the show, because I want it to be accessible, and I want everyone to be able to learn from the videos. So if there's violence, then maybe a younger audience wouldn't have access to that content, and that's not what I want. I would like it to be for everyone all the time. Anyone can watch these videos. Are there any topics that you definitely do not want to cover related to auditing and police interactions? Well, not really. There are some topics that sort of have political overlap that I definitely try to avoid, such as mask mandates, for example. That type of stuff. I really try to keep politics out of this channel, and I think it's very important to the objective nature of the channel. So I guess, yeah, there are some. And what goals do you have for the channel now versus when you first began? Well, Audit the Audit has certainly taken it's changed, since it began. There was in the beginning, it was meant to be strictly based on auditing and sort of trying to figure out what misconceptions were being circulated within the auditing community. But now it is kind of transformed into a police interaction channel where we explore everything, not just audits. So that's definitely where it has grown the most, is that we cover much more than just auditing. Okay, Mike Carrico, sorry if I butchered that. How do you stop officers thinking that everything they say is a lawful order? As a disabled person, I am safer in vehicles, but police order me out for officer safety. How can I remain in a vehicle without violence upon me, dragging me out of the vehicle? That's an interesting question. First of all, I would say that oftentimes you're not going to change an officer's mind by, arguing with them whether or not their orders are lawful. And honestly, that is up for the court to decide. If an officer tells you to get out of your vehicle, the best thing to do is just get out of your vehicle. I mean, they do have the authority to do that according to Pennsylvania versus Mims. But if you are a disabled individual, then I think the best thing that you can do is just make that disability known, and inform the officers that you require special arrangements. Of course, that doesn't guarantee you that you're going to get the treatment that you deserve or that you need, but there's nothing to lose from informing them of that. And if you were to challenge their activity or their conduct in court, that could definitely work in your favor. So there's really nothing that you can say that's going to convince an officer that their orders are not lawful. The best thing to do is just to listen to their orders and then challenge it in court later. Dr. DAM Dragon. Do law enforcement officers study the Bill of Rights in training? Um, well, it's hard to say because a lot of different, it's not like there's a universal training regimen for police officers. So I'm sure some of them do. I'm not sure if all of them do. Why does a law enforcement officer always ask or demand ID when they walk up to you? It's because they've been trained to do that. You know, it's I don't think if they walk up to you and ask for your ID, that is a consensual encounter. You're not required to do that unless they have reasonable suspicion. Now, when the officer informs you that I have a reason to ask you this, then you just give them your ID. And if they don't, of course, later you can challenge that. Why do law enforcement officers always have to have the last word? I think a lot of that's about ego and the culture of policing. And there's a lot about the psychology of policing that just plainly has not been studied. So it's very difficult to say if there's a particularized reason for that. How many hours of de-escalation training do law enforcement officers go through? Well, it depends, but I'll say this: not enough. Many departments require certain amounts, and some states have statewide regulations on how much de-escalation training officers have to have, but there's no universal standard, and there's never enough de-escalation training. I think that is something that officers could constantly improve on, even if they have consistent training. Do law enforcement officers want mental health workers to handle wellness checks? I can't speak on behalf of all law enforcement officers, and I'm not a law enforcement officer. So, but judging from, I think that law enforcement officers would be open to anyone helping them do their job. I mean, wouldn't anyone in any industry want someone to help them better their jobs? Uh, we got a couple more of these, and then we'll start talking to the chat. Nage asks, how did you come about making this channel, and did you expect it to be as successful as it is now? Um, well, I came about making this channel because I had, a lot of experience with rights and stuff, and through covering the Supreme Court in my work as a journalist. But I also had an interaction of my own that ended favorably for me because of the fact that I knew my rights. And I'd been aware of the First Amendment activism community for a long time. And it just sort of happened. It was like skill meets opportunity. I just sort of happened to do that. It wasn't really so calculated. And there's definitely no way that I would have foreseen the type of success the channel has had. Yeah, I had no idea. I had no idea, and I'm grateful for it. I appreciate every one of you who have learned something And I sincerely appreciate all of your support. It means a lot, and I'm more than happy to do this. It's a great, means to express myself and also put my skills to use. And so, thank you all for giving me the opportunity to do that. Will you be doing videos about situations happening in other countries? This is a big one. And, I get submissions all the time from different countries, mainly Canada and the UK. But I cannot, I always say that I would be doing a disservice to the community if I were to try to um, explore the nuances of a legal system that I don't fully understand. My knowledge begins and ends with the United States justice system. Beyond that, I really can't provide clarification because I don't have a deep understanding of those legal systems. And, you know, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with how foreign legal systems work, but it's usually nothing like how America operates. We have a constitution that is held to a very high standard, and that is certainly not the case in other countries. So there's no way that I could give you a deep understanding of it. It would be like me trying to learn something and teach you it at the same time, and I just don't think that that would be. It wouldn't be fair to you all. Okay, and this is the last question before we go into the chat. From your experiences in doing First Amendment audits, what has surprised you the most? Well, first of all, I don't do First Amendment audits. I've never done a First Amendment audit, and I am not an auditor. And hats off to all the auditors who actually go out into the street and perform this type of service. Um, I consider myself a reporter who is reporting on the First Amendment activism community. I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily someone who identifies with that movement as a whole, because it's just not my job, I guess. It's much like, hey, ASD, it's much like, it's much like how reporters report on police officers, or some instance that occurred. My job is to recap the instances and bring facts to the table and context. So I don't consider myself an auditor whatsoever. All right, let's take some questions from the chat. If you have any questions, throw them up and we'll talk about it. How long does it take you to research a video for a channel? United Watcher says. Well, it varies. And I talked about this on my podcast with ASD, who was in the chat earlier. But it generally takes several hours of research per video. I mean, as you can see, I only post one video per week, which that should give you some insight as to how long it takes. Usually, I would say a good average is about 20 to 30 hours per video. But some videos take longer and some may take weeks to actually fully come together, gathering all the resources and the information and contacting the people that, are involved. Dwayne Mansell says, are you making it off of the backs of others? I wouldn't say so, because for one, all of the people, I would say 99% of the videos that are featured on this channel come from submissions, and the people want me to review their videos, and if they don't, then they're usually public records. And if someone who isn't the original creator of the video sends me a video, then I try my best to locate that person who originally filmed it and talk to them about the interaction. So there's no videos on my channel where I feel like the person didn't gain anything from the video. Let's see. How can police make an arrest without violating social distancing? Um, that's a good question, and I'm sure that there are exceptions though within the mandates. And keep in mind that these are mandates; they're not necessarily law. Some places have drafted ordinances which force people to wear masks in public, or else they risk being fined. But you have to know that you have to understand that a lot of that is not based on law, and that's why you have all of these governors, and all these people being sued for um, drafting these mandates. Yeah, so and not to mention you know, you have to consider a court would be willing to consider the interest in, weigh the interest in maintaining social distancing versus effectuating an arrest. Which one was more important in that moment? Because if you can't have two things at the exact same time, they're definitely going to, weigh the two options and then decide whether the officer is is within the right. Jack Monday says, "Are you open to covering videos of police interactions from different protests?" Not really. And the reason for that is because it is so highly politicized, and we live in a cancel culture. And I would not like to, create any kind of misconceptions about this channel being attached to any particular agendas. So I try to avoid insinuating anything by covering certain interactions. I certainly have my opinions on all of that, but that's that has nothing to do with Audit the Audit, and I'm going to keep it that way. Let's see. Can you discuss what exactly stop and identify means? Reasonable suspicion is still required to ask for identification, correct? Do rights change in a stop and identify state? Well, stop and identify states are sort of like they're sort of pseudo laws, because the Terry Doctrine established that you have to have reasonable suspicion to identify people. So even in states that are stop and identify states, you still have to have the officer still has to have reasonable suspicion before they can force you to identify yourself. So it's very it's sort of trivial to have stop and identify states because they don't really serve any purpose. Never Again asks, will I ever go back to reading scripts? I'm not sure. You know, I get a lot of feedback talking about how people appreciate my voice, and you know, it, everyone has their own. No one likes their own voice, and I always felt as though having a professional take over the narration would add a degree of, um, I guess, objectivity in a way. So it's still up in the air. Maybe one day. Ricky D says, "Would you cover ex felon rights? Because I see that other ex felons get their rights taken away." I have covered this briefly in a past episode, um, and that is true. That in some instances, you can have your rights taken away for committing a violent crime or a felony in general. But most states, even more conservative ones, have ways in which you can go about, getting your rights restored. Personally, I don't really agree with the idea of taking someone's rights away for example, for a felony drug charge or something like that. Never again is very right. Ex-felon rights are so different from state to state, and that's very true. Um, and the way by which you can get your rights back is extremely different as well. It's really hard to in some cases, in some states it's extremely hard to get your rights back, and in some states it's just a matter of time before your rights naturally restore. So it's there's a big discrepancy there, and personally, I think maybe that is an area that could use some type of universal standard. um, Smiley says he stopped watching the channel when the new narrator was made permanent. Well, sorry to hear that. I think that there's definitely there's still the same educational value here to be had, whether or not it's actually me saying what I wrote. What are the goals for the channel in the next 5 years? Well, I discussed this on ASD's podcast as well. I think that eventually Audit the Audit will probably come to an end. I think that this is not something that I foresee pursuing for the rest of my life. I think that right now it's very great, and I love, I love doing this. But one day, I think that I will have bestowed as much knowledge as I possibly can in this area, and will probably move over to something else in the future. And I hope maybe some of you will follow me there. Um, and I urge you to check out the content that will be coming out on our second channel, and just see if you like it. You know, at what point does an audit go from protecting our rights to tying up resources and being a public nuisance? Well, I think that, and that comes from Let's Dive Maui. The thing about it is that a perfect audit, in a perfect world where someone is conducting a First Amendment audit, no police officers show up because no laws are being broken, and everyone understands that. So you really have to question who is actually tying up the resources here. Is it the auditor who's doing something legal, or is it the police officers who perceive their actions as illegal? So, you know, police officers don't have to interact with auditors. They choose to do so. And granted, sometimes, and I would even go as far as to say as many times, they are warranted in interacting with audits and auditors. So, I think it's a two-way street. As long as you audit in the correct way and you're not doing something that's obviously suspicious, um, I think that it's the police who are tying up the resources. So it can become an overlap pretty quickly. Let's see. Maybe it is the ignorance of the citizens that call the police. Yeah, that's certainly an argument to be made, uh, that Teach All Nations says. But also, the police officers could easily just say, just maybe even just make contact with one officer and determine, oh, well, he's not doing anything illegal. Bye. Off grid philosophy says, have you ever had your rights compromised in real life? Yes. Yes, I have. More than once. I come from my hometown is in the southeast, and it seems to me that officers there are tend to be a little bit more misinformed than in more metropolitan areas. So before I, even had an education, like for example, when I was a teenager, I had interactions with police officers that didn't do things the right way, and I didn't know that then. I mean, it took an education for me to understand. Um, so yes, I have. And I believe it's a common theme. So Okay, let's see. Somebody throw up a question here. Is 69 your favorite number? I mean, it's a good number. I think 3 is probably my favorite number. What is the appropriate way to deny an officer your ID when they are refusing to tell you what their reasonable suspicion is? Levi Kidder says that. Well, first of all, what you need to understand is that officers are not required to tell you what their reasonable suspicion is. So if they ask you for your ID and you say, I don't want to give it, and they say something like, well, you have to give it, then just give it to them, because then you can challenge that in court and they will have to prove whether or not, you know, they actually did have the legal grounds to get your identification. Surif Creed says, do you think reforming the police system into citizen policing can be a practical solution? Well, the thing about it is that police began as citizen police, and this is what we have now is an evolution of the system over, a large amount of time. I do think that there certainly needs to be an entire paradigm shift in the way that policing is done. And it's not something that's necessarily going to have one singular solution, such as having citizen police or maybe having someone else take over certain calls. I don't think that that necessarily is going to serve the entire purpose of reform, but it's going to have to be in small steps. So if we take small steps forward, such as employing citizen police, then that will certainly help the cause. And eventually, maybe we will take enough small steps forward to where we fall off the cliff of reformation. Any material on Border Patrol with their roadblocks? I do have an episode that sort of touches on this topic, but generally, um, Border Patrol checkpoints are. There has been a lot of court rulings that validate their roadblocks. So, I think that a lot of people are under this misconception that any form of roadblock is, against the Constitution. But you know, something may be against the Constitution in your interpretation. But what really matters is that the Supreme Court interprets it in a certain way, and we have all, as a nation, decided, to bestow our power into the Supreme Court. So if you want to fix, the separation between the people and the Constitution, you have to look at fixing the Supreme Court first. And is that a broken system? Possibly. It could be argued. Ricky D says, in the case of George Floyd a few months ago, if I was a bystander, could I have ordered one of the officers to get off Mr. Floyd? Um, no, definitely not. Not legally. Now, would the courts have said that you were wrong for doing something about it? Possibly. That's a highly circumstantial situation, and it's something that the courts haven't typically had problems with. So it's difficult to say, but you can't ever just push a police officer off of someone and expect not to be arrested for that. How should qualified immunity be reformed to hold police accountable while protecting them from unreasonable lawsuits? That's a great question, Chuckless. Um, well, I think that qualified immunity, the doctrine in itself, is not necessarily so wrong. The idea of it is it's valid. Police officers shouldn't have to surrender their authority in fear of being sued for doing something wrong. And a lot of things about the law are not clearly defined. And sometimes an officer may act in a certain way, and it may be a questionable thing. And if they hadn't done that, maybe someone would have been harmed. But if they had done that, then they subjected themselves to a lawsuit. The problem with qualified immunity is that it was reformed and to basically say that we're not going to worry about whether or not a constitutional violation occurred. That's not the problem. What we're going to focus on is whether or not it was clearly defined in law now. And that created this system where if any little discrepancy hasn't been well established in law, then the case is essentially protected under qualified immunity. And that's not right, of course. That doesn't serve the people. I think that the best thing to do would be to go back to the original form of qualified immunity, where the constitutional violation actually played a role in whether or not um, something was considered to be protected under qualified immunity. And I'll be doing a more in-depth look at qualified immunity sometime in the future. I'm thinking about doing a video essay on qualified immunity. You guys let me know if you think that that's a good idea. All right, I'll take one more question from the chat, and then we'll try to take a phone call. Like I said, though, this is still experimental, so I'm not sure how it's going to go, but we'll try it out. We may take more than a few. So let's see. Is audio evidence of an audit or any use in regard to reporting it on YouTube, or is the video the only thing really viable? That's a difficult. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Is audio evidence of an audit? Well, first of all, I mean, I would think that video is pretty much the only thing that's really viable on this platform. Granted, here I am on a audio broadcast, but it's difficult to find success, without having some type of video content. All right, so let's try this. Let's try taking a phone call. Let's see here. Let's see if you can see that. Yeah, there you go. You can place a call to that number, and I will speak to you on this phone here. I'm not sure how it's going to work, so bear with me as I figure that out. Okay, we got a call. Hey, this is Audit the Audit.
Hi, Audit the Audit. So my question is there a reason beyond individual privacy to not self-identify?
That's a good question. Well, I think that not self-identifying certainly sets a precedent for officers to work with in the future. So it's more than just one interaction. I would say that you have to consider that officers, they work with their experience, and their experience is considered a lot inside the courtroom as well. So, I mean, along with maintaining your personal privacy, you also offer the officer an opportunity to think that they can do this to other people in the future. And imagine if everyone in the United States just surrendered their identity at the whim of a police officer. It would create this, culture that's sort of subservient to authoritarian regimes, and kind of goes against the whole formulation of the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
No, that's good.
All right, thank you. All right, we got another one coming in. AtA here.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, my channel name. Do you mind if I give my channel name?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, road to prison.
Gotcha.
I was in the chat, but no. What do you have a name or just call you ATA?
You can call me under the pseudonym John Lang. That's what I'll be using for this
Okay.
show.
All right, all right. Good to meet you, John Wayne. My name is Lee.
Nice to
But
meet you, Lee.
yeah, I wanted to ask you what you thought about body cameras. That some agencies don't use body cameras, especially in today's day and age. That's kind of odd. What do you think about the mandatory requirement for all agencies across all cities, counties, and states, even federal, to use body cameras, and then to allow that footage to be accessible by the public without filing a FOIA request?
Well, I think that would be great, and I wouldn't be able to understand why a department would be against something like that. Because it seems like it would dispel a lot of the misconceptions around their interactions that tend to drum up in the media. And I think the real problem here, though, is when you're talking about state or countrywide databases, there's a lot of politics involved in that, and it tends to get lost in the surface level objections of, say the right or the left. So I think it's a great idea, but I just worry about the actual implementation of the idea, because it seems to me like there would be a lot of
So,
people who would be against it.
well, yeah, it would be politicized immediately for
Right.
one reason or the other. Unfortunately, I'm going to submit some information to you about my own personal situation. I'm facing a felony charge right now out of Oakland County, Michigan, and the officers do not, or deputies, they do not wear body cameras,
Mm,
and which is kind of a an issue with me in general. But
right.
yeah, I'm definitely gonna submit some footage to you, and hopefully you can get it on there. But I appreciate you taking my call. I really enjoy your channel, and you do a great job how you present it, where you look at both sides and you outweigh it. We need more channels like you. So I definitely wanted to give you a thumbs up and maybe keep a heads up or an eye open for my submission to your channel.
Absolutely. Will do, Lee. Thank you for calling in.
All right, thanks, buddy.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye. All right. We're moving on to the next one here. This is ATA.
Yes, my name is Paul Smart, and I was just wanting to ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
That's all right. One I would like to do is two questions, actually. One, why didn't they use the original voice on the videos? And also, what I would like to know is the legality of officers running license plates all the time.
Yes. Okay.
That's something I've seen many auditors get identified because officers run their license plates.
Right.
And so that's my curiosity is like, can that be used in court? Is it legal for them to just run your license plate for no purpose other than to get your identification? I personally think that the violation would be or should be a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
All right. Well, to answer your first question, I changed voices because, for one, I was having a medical condition at the time that was preventing me from narrating correctly.
Gotcha.
And once my narrator sort of took over and started doing well, I appreciate his voice and his work, so I decided just to let him stay. I still have another surgery, so to speak, to take care of in the near future. So if I did come back to the channel, it would be a while. But to answer your question, I'm actually covering this topic in an upcoming episode, but I will go ahead and give you a sneak peek.
That sounds good.
The Supreme Court has not directly addressed the relationship between license plates and the Fourth Amendment. But a lot of lower courts have. And I think the reason the Supreme Court hasn't address this issue is because the lower courts have so thoroughly made arguments for how it should be that the Supreme Court doesn't want to rule on it. It doesn't have to. For example, 2006 Sixth Circuit Court, in the case of Ellison versus United States, the court held that it is unreasonable to have an expectation of privacy in an object that is required by law to be placed in plain view on a vehicle. And it went on to say that no argument can be made that a motorist seeks to keep information on his license plate private, because the very purpose of a license plate is so that others, to law enforcement officers and others, can gather identifying information about that vehicle. And this decision comes from the notions established in the 1967 Supreme Court case of Katz v. United States, which it essentially said that what a person knowingly exposes to the public is not subject to Fourth Amendment protection. And they also drew this conclusion from the 68 case of Harris v. United States, which established a precedent that anything that's in plain view of an officer, they may use to further their reasonable suspicion or whatnot. So, although it sounds on the surface level like, yeah, you should have some protection in your identity based on your license plate.
Very true. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the courts see it in a different way. And, their reasoning, although in my opinion, maybe somewhat of a stretch, is still valid. And that's just the law that we have to live by right now.
Unfortunately, I saw this one particular video of two officers in Florida pull over an African-American woman, and they, quote unquote, ran her license plates, and it came back as nothing. Well, come to find out, the lady was the attorney for Florida, like the state attorney.
Oh yeah, I believe I saw that.
They trumped up a "your tent is too dark" to pull her over, and I'm using air quotes, and come to find out she was the U.S. attorney, and she was all like, yeah, I want your cards and this, that, and the other. She didn't pursue any kind of disciplinary actions on the officers because technically they were following the state, or the Florida statutes or whatever.
Right.
And I still feel like that's just an absolute violation. I've seen other auditors, and personally, I think First Amendment auditors are a necessary evil almost. And the way the officers treat them in their videos is just dumbfounding, and it's almost sad to see. It's an officer, and he's supposed to be upholding law, not their feelings.
Right.
And it's just like, this is just extremely sad how all they're armed with are cameras. That's it.
Yeah.
Video cameras.
Yeah, it's definitely a prevalent problem for sure. And, it's not something that's going to be, I will say that over the years, it's definitely gotten better. Police officers are more aware nowadays that the whole First Amendment auditor thing exists.
I even had, I wish I could remember the gentleman's name, but he's even a reason for Turner v. Driver. I'm in Texas, so he is the absolute reason for Turner v. Driver. And I live a stone's throw away from our police station here in my hometown. He came to my hometown and did a First Amendment auditor, and my hometown passed and did actually a really good job.
That's good to hear.
I was beside myself on how well that, they did go out and interact with him. Can I have your license ID? He said, no, I'm just filming this, that, and the other. And they were like, oh, okay. She went back inside. He went inside, spoke to them directly about how do I complain on an officer or how do I compliment an officer? And they were dumbfounded that he wanted to compliment an officer. We've never had anybody ask how to compliment an officer.
Yeah.
I actually thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, the person you're referring to is known as the Batosai on YouTube, and his name is
Thank you,
Philip Turner.
Batosa. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to meet him in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I would too. And I've reached out to him to be a guest on the show, and we'll see how that goes in the future. Thank you for your call.
That sounds good. Yes, sir. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good day.
You too. Be blessed. Bye.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And that goes to show that auditors are certainly becoming more prevalent in our society. And, for better or for worse, there's more awareness surrounding this movement. So that's good. And we're going to take the next call now. Probably take about two or three more and wrap it up for the day.
Hello.
Yo, yeah, sorry. This is Audit the Audit here. How's it going?
I'm doing very well. This is Dwayne Mansell in Amarillo, Texas.
How you doing, Dwayne?
I'm doing very well. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do you believe that the oversight committees that are overseeing the police actually do any good if they're made up of only the affluent people of the community?
That is a very, very valid question, Dwayne. And the thing about that is that many of these local oversight committees, as you said, are made up of affluent people in the community who already have built up relationships with the people in the police department. So, it's really difficult to say whether or not that all of those oversight committees actually perform their legitimate functions. I will say that there are in more metropolitan areas such as Chicago. If you remember the video I did on the police officer arresting the transit authority officer, the oversight committee, yeah, in that case, they certainly did do something. And I think that once you get into more metropolitan areas where there are higher concentrations of populations, those close relationships between the oversight committees and the police departments sort of fade away. But
Well,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
it's one of the situations here in Amarillo. We do not have an overt problem with police. All the police I've dealt with have been good. Of course, I haven't been stopped since 1998 for anything. But on the other hand, I watch all these videos of police acting bad, and the oversight committees do nothing. Qualified immunity just slaps their hand, puts them right back on the job. And that goes right along with police unions. I do not feel that the police should be able to have a union. The FOP here in Texas just seems to cover for the bad cops.
Yeah, police unions are certainly something that needs to be addressed, to say the least. Now, don't get me wrong. Some police unions, they, do certain functions that are necessary to any industry. But the majority of police unions are strictly, they don't care about any of the circumstances. They have an agenda, and that is to make sure that the officers who pay their bills are getting their money's worth. And it's difficult.
And
Go ahead.
the bad part about police unions and the federal order of police here in Texas, or I don't remember what I misspoke, and that's not right. But the thing is, they're making political donations to people to cover their butt. And I have
Yeah.
a problem with that.
Right.
Is there anything we can do about that?
Unfortunately, not. If let's say that, let's think of this as a hypothetical. If we were to say this union in particular cannot have a political stake in any elections, then we would have to say that about all unions. And some unions, such as the welding unions, or just labor unions in general, they certainly do help their workers, get to a certain.
No doubt.
Yeah. So,
And there's no doubt about that. But police are government employees.
right.
We pay these police. We pay these officers. And I have a problem with them having a union that just covers every officer, good, bad, or indifferent. They cover every officer. They don't care. So
Yeah.
the officers have zero accountability regardless.
Right. And it's definitely a sort of rock in the hard place scenario that doesn't have any easy answers. And I'm certainly not one to say that I have the answers for that, but I do sympathize with your sentiments here, and I think that there does need to be some kind of answer for that. What that is, I don't think I'm in the position to say.
Hey, you're just like me. You sound just like me now. I don't know what to do about it, but I feel like something needs to be done about it.
Right.
But and I understand. I don't know what. I'll let you go. I love your show, man. I love all your videos. I was playing devil advocate earlier about some of the stuff I was posting online, and but I do love your show.
Oh, well, I appreciate that,
I
Dan.
thank you, and I'll let you go, man.
All right. You have a good day.
Never miss a bid.
All right. Bye. Yeah, Dwayne certainly has some good points there. And it's, police unions are definitely one of those things that it's going to be, it's an impossible situation. And, of course, I don't have all the answers for that, as I mentioned. All right, we'll take a couple more calls here, and we'll say good day for the day. But let's see who's up next. ATA here.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely.
I really like the show. I was watching it. Now, just a simple question. When police pull over somebody and they got it in the driver and they see that they are being recorded and the driver does, his regular thing, I'm not going to give you this or that. And you can see the police keep pressing in, and then at some point you see, they know they kind of stepped in it. But why do they keep going? They keep pressing on that driver. When they know he's right, do they know something? Or do they got some backing that we don't know about?
Well,
why do they keep pressing?
I think you're okay. I think that, there's not one answer for that. And, every police officer is different in their motivations. But I think that a lot of it comes down to a couple different things. And first off is the ego, police culture has built up in such a way that reinforces all of these egotistical ideologies. And it tends to reinforce, when you get into this state of cognitive dissonance where you're being proven wrong, a lot of times your brain does this thing where it takes that information and uses it to reinforce your wrong information. So whenever you encounter someone who can prove you wrong, it's oftentimes just reinforces your own ideologies that are still wrong. And I think a lot of officers suffer from sort of egotistical mindset that leads them to drive further into the hole rather than backing out and taking an objective stance. And with that, though, is that when you have an industry who is in desperate need of accountability, and you see all these officers doing all these bad things every day, you think well, I don't have to worry about it because a lot of officers do bad things and they just move on to the next department, even if they get fired in a worst case scenario. So I really think a lot of that comes back to accountability as well. But of course, like I said, there's no simple answer for that. And it's very difficult to give you a blanket statement because, as I said, all officers are different. And it's also important to consider that of the millions of police interactions that happen every day, only so many of those are the result of someone's rights being violated. So it's not that all officers do that. It's just that the ones who do that are now becoming in the public spotlight because of the age of digital technology.
Absolutely. I believe that's spot on. I made a comment earlier about my wife's high school friend, right out of high school, joined the Texas State Troopers. He was on a routine stop, pulled over, traffic stop, pulled over, walked up to the window. The guy shot him 7 times in the face.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, I know cops. I know they got to be careful. I know just never know what's going to pop out there, but against them. So I can respect that on that side. So
right.
They just press on, and it just gets me that they know, man, I could get in trouble, or my captain, or time off, or fired, and they just keep going.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess that's what makes the show, right?
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Okay, man. Thanks for taking.
Absolutely. You have a good day. Yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to get past is the ego. I mean, anyone in an authority position suffers from this, and it's not like it's something that's exclusive to the police departments. Anyone in an authority figure. I'm sure if any of you have a job and you've experienced what it's like to work with upper management, you get that same sense. Where it doesn't matter what you say or how right you are. What matters is the hierarchy here. And often, police officers are in control at that time, and they do what they have to maintain that control. All right, we're going to take a couple more here. ATA. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's up?
So I got first off, I love your videos. I love your channel.
Thank you.
Been subscribed for a long time. I got two questions actually.
Sure.
So you see a lot in your videos and a lot of these First Amendment audit videos that these officers do violate these people's either First Amendment right or Fourth Amendment right. And then you see follow-up videos where they do go and file complaints. Do you think that, because I don't believe this, do you think that these departments, these supervisors even do anything with these complaints? Because it's very weird how you have a lot of these complaints going into these departments and you just keep seeing these same violations over and over again. I don't think they're doing anything with these complaints, really.
Right. That's certainly a valid question. And I think that this sort of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about there being a fine line between rural departments and metropolitan departments, because in a metropolitan department, it tends to be a lot more organized and structured. And it's not so much of a word of mouth sort of workflow. And I think, in places like Chicago, New York, LA, big cities, they tend to, you can track the, where these complaints go, who handled them, what they did. And a lot of that is public information, or it can be found through a discovery. So I would say that it's both a yes and a no. In bigger departments, I think that there oftentimes is something done. Now, is that enough to counteract something like that happening again? Probably not. But in the smaller departments, a lot of these complaints just sort of evaporate into thin air, especially if they're not followed up with some kind of legal action. So, there's not really a universal answer to whether or not they do or do not do things with these internal complaints. And again, a lot of that hinges on whether or not there's some type of civilian oversight committees as well. So, it's just really hard to say or to give you a yes or a no. I think it's more so both.
Okay. So one more question.
Sure.
So you talked about this earlier in the radio show, and I've looked up on it a little bit, but you talk about Pennsylvania v. Mims, where the officer does not need a reason to pull you out of the vehicle. And
Right.
I've researched Rodriguez v. United States, where the victim got searched by the canine. His car got searched by the canine, and it found out that there were drugs inside the vehicle. And he then counteracted at the court to say they didn't have suspicion to go into his to actually search the vehicle. Do you think? Because I think that officers do need reasonable suspicion to either like pull you out of the vehicle or search it, even with a canine. Do you think that do you think that you would want that to be changed? Because I feel like that could do something with all these things going on with both of those cases.
Right. Well, the main takeaway from the Rodriguez case wasn't necessarily whether or not they had reasonable suspicion to search the vehicle. That was certainly an element of it. But what the courts really set forth in that case was that you cannot extend the length of a traffic stop in order to have a canine search a vehicle just because you have a hunch that there may be some kind of drugs inside of it, right? That was really what they were saying there. And as far as the Mims case, I say that they don't need a reason because they actually do need a reason, but it's such a shallow reason and so easy to justify the reason that it basically amounts to them being able to pull you out of the car. And to try to hinge your whole case on whether or not they, adhered to the precedent set forth in the Mims case is not a very strategic way to, build your case against an officer. In the Mims case, what they really said was that if an officer feels as though he may be in danger or that the person he's interacting with has a weapon, then he can pull them out of the car. But what actually constitutes an officer feeling that way is very open to interpretation, and almost anything that they say, can amount to that. So it's not that there's not precedence there to prevent them from, circumventing reasonable suspicion to get you out of your vehicle or to search it. It's just that the courts have been so lenient with how they can go about exercising that authority that it has basically dissolved the merits established in it and turned into, well, we can just pull you out for any reason, and the courts basically just allow that to happen. So it's not something that I like to harp about on the channel because I don't want people thinking that they're going to build an entire case around whether or not the officer actually perceived them as a threat, because that, that's not going to be a case that's going to go anywhere.
Right. I don't know. I just feel that, just the Supreme Court is, I think they just need to be like a little more strict on that. Just like kind of, you can take the officer's word, but don't be too lenient where you take everything the officer says. They need to have some proof, right?
Yeah, it's like, I really think that the Supreme Court should really look at the objective facts of it and not, a lot of their rulings tend to be based on the officer's experience. They take that into account for a lot of things, but officer experience it's not an objective fact. They have experience, but what they have experience with and how that experience serves them in the field is not necessarily something that translates well as far as preserving civil rights. So it's definitely a very difficult thing to rationalize as far as the court has, why they've made those decisions.
Right.
Yeah. Is there anything else I can help you with?
No, that's pretty much it. I love your channel. Love everything that you do.
Oh, well, I sincerely appreciate that. And thank you for calling in, and feel free to call back in another episode.
I certainly will. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
A lot of that goes back to the whole thing about Supreme Court terms being lifelong. And, things, especially in our world, things change so much, and there's just such a, like things 10 years ago are not even close to what they are now. And it's difficult for the Supreme Court to rationalize their experience as a Supreme Court justice with the modern standards of today. So it's kind of, maybe a solution to that would be putting a term limit on Supreme Court justices. But, that's just a humble suggestion. We'll go to the next call. This is AtA.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I thank you so much for taking my call. This is GapKid94, by the way. I've been listening to your content for a bit over a year now, and it's extremely educational, thoroughly valuable for all, I think. And thanks for answering my question from the community page. I've recently moved cross country, so I was looking for kind of a decent resource to start and stay relevantly informed based on my location.
Right.
I just have a couple questions. So when you mentioned that you want to ensure your content is accessible by all, So I was just curious about whether or not you're maybe aiming specifically to reach youth, and if you think that there should be more education for youth on these sorts of matters and how that could or should be implemented.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily aiming at youth, but I definitely think I would like to think that, um, you know, there are some parents out there who might at least share that knowledge with their children, or maybe even invite them to watch the show. I just want to make sure that if there are any children out there who are watching, that they can watch it without their parents fearing that they may see something inappropriate. But I don't think that I'm necessarily aiming at children. It's definitely more of an adult style show, and but I'm not opposed to the idea of, like I said, parents sharing that knowledge. And to get to the second part of your question, um, I think it would be extremely beneficial if there was a constitutional rights class that was either an elective or maybe even mandatory within our current curriculums. Students have nothing to lose by learning more about their rights, and creating a more informed public, it serves to better our society as a whole and ensure that the values that we hold as Americans are adhered to. And I definitely think it would cut down on the amount of misconceptions that are, sort of floating around the internet. If people had this just some kind of objective reasoning for, like, say, I learned this in school from an authority figure, from someone who knows a lot about this.
Sure, yeah, I think that your recent video, kind of what you alluded to earlier, just about having that surface level understanding can be kind of some of your videos talk about show how that can be helpful, and then some show how that can sort of be harmful. And so that's kind of been interesting to see, like, different sides of that token, I guess. But yeah, thank you so much. I just have one more question. This is more a specific video question. It's about citizens arrests. I may be mistaken. I don't think I've seen a video from your channel in the past covering one. I was just curious if you would ever consider doing a video on one, I guess, if you found one. I've actually seen one or two people in the comments mention it. I also just kind of think it's interesting, and I don't know much about it. And I feel like, at least for me, it's kind of confusing to understand the intricacies of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, it's a complicated topic for sure. And, the parameters of what exactly makes a citizen's arrest valid, they vary from state to state. And I believe I touched on this just a little bit when I covered the case of Ahmaud Arbery. Um, and
Right.
you know it's like I said, it's so highly circumstantial, and the laws vary greatly from state to state on what exactly a citizen's arrest can be effectuated for. um, there's a lot of circumstances where you would think that you would be within your rights to make a citizen's arrest, but that might end up getting you arrested. I don't have any particular knowledge to pass on to you right now about that, but I will certainly consider that request for an upcoming episode, and I'll be on the lookout for a video about a citizen's arrest. And if you find one, feel free to email it to me. You can find my email, in all of the videos, and that goes for the chat as
Right.
well.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, it's definitely kind of a fascinating topic. But like I said, I've been watching your channel for a while, and you've been extremely helpful. Just like informative, educational. I've really never been involved in the legal system. I'd say I almost grew up a little bit of a sheltered life, and kind of just being able to learn a lot more and gain a lot of education from your videos is extremely helpful, and I think helpful for anyone. So I really also like that you said that you kind of make it accessible for everybody. I think that's really great. So thank you so much. I look forward to more content, and congrats on the podcast.
Hey, thank you very much. And it warms my heart to think that someone is being educated by my content. And I sincerely thank you for watching. And I look forward to speaking to you again and maybe covering your topic.
Sure. I just to plug you for a sec, I also just became a Patreon. So
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
too.
I appreciate that. You too. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah, citizens arrests, certainly a deep topic and definitely warrants an episode of ATA. If you guys come across any videos of citizens arrests, particularly videos that also involve officers, that would be really good. I would definitely like to dive into that topic. We'll take one last call here, and then we're going to wrap it up for the day. I don't want to take up all of you guys' time. And just to remind you, we'll be doing this every Sunday, and we'll be having guests on. This will become a regular thing for a while. So if you don't catch me, if you didn't catch me today, tell your friends they can catch me Sunday. All right, next call. ATA here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Not too bad. I'm not on live right now, right?
No, you are. You're
screening.
live.
Oh no, I thought you were just screening calls first.
No. We're just going in.
Okay. Well, I've been kind of listening to you in the background. Let me turn it off because I think everything what you're saying. I love everything that you say and do and all that stuff. But I'm really curious, and I've been listening and watching your product or your program, ATA/John Wayne, whatever you want to call yourself. But I love what you're, the narrative and the perspective. However, as far as narratives and perspectives go, how does this go as far as like the Karens and stuff? I feel like some people are instigators. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that there's definitely some people out there who take advantage of the way that the system operates now with law enforcement, as far as making calls that aren't necessarily true, and just sort of taking advantage of officer bias. And it's very difficult to, for an officer to, become aware of that before they respond to a call. Um, and you have to consider the chain of communication that occurs before an officer is even dispatched to a place. I mean, I don't know if you ever played that game in school where, the teacher whispers something into a student's ear, and then that student whispers it into the next student's ear. And then eventually, you get a completely different message from what the person originally said. That sort of happens in the chain of communication with officers by, you have someone who's calling in. Most of the time, it's multiple people who are all saying different versions of what happened, telling the dispatch, who then, condenses that and sends it to the officers. So it's so easy to take advantage of.
No, it's just like witnessing an accident from four corners. Like you have four different witnesses and a car accident, in an intersection or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That everybody has a different perspective of how things went. But I was just curious. I am sorry to take so much time.
Oh, it's okay.
I just want to know. Okay, you had several callers back talking about body cams for the cops. I believe in the body cams for the cops. I don't know how you feel about it. But I also believe that people should be having like kind of their own body cams. Like, how do you feel about that? That we all kind of are getting our own perspective, or that we all can tell our story from our perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And actually, I had been considering developing a product, and I wasn't sure how my audience would respond to this. I mean, and you can give me a heads up, and so can the chat. But it's pretty common practice nowadays for people to have dash cams, right? And
Right.
like you were saying, it might be beneficial to also have a body cam for yourself. And I think maybe there's a room in the market to create something that functions as both a body cam and a dash cam. Like, say you have a sort of magnetic holder where you can put this camera in your car, and you can attach it to a magnetic, retractable device that would hold it in a certain position while you were driving. And then if you were forced to get
John
out,
Wayne, you're speaking to the choir. I think that
Yeah,
is a great plan. I
right.
think you should like kind of manifest that, and like this is the stuff I'm talking about, is how do we all protect ourselves from each other when everybody is so divisive right now?
Right. It's very difficult, and there's no simple solution because, a lot of people exist on these political polarization sides that are so far from each other that no middle ground can be seen, and
I know.
it's difficult to navigate that, and maintain your own beliefs, especially if
Right.
you have beliefs that sort of fall in the middle of those two things. It's almost like you're an enemy of both. Um,
Well, and that's the thing. Like even on the Karen sites or whatever, it's like who's being more the Karen, or who's instigating what more? The person taking the photo or taking the video, or who? Like some of these, I'm like totally confused by. I'm like I appreciate when you grade everything, when you say like, and also I am curious, like how do you know the law so well? Are you a law? Are you a lawyer? Or
well, no,
a whole lot.
I am not a
Sorry.
lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, just so everyone knows that. I am a journalist. I used
Oh,
to,
okay.
yeah, I used to cover the Supreme Court, and I wrote for many different publications about different Supreme Court rulings, and that sort of sparked my interest in the subject. And then, of course, over the years, I've developed lots of research and experience in finding laws and relevant court cases. So it just kind of all wrapped up into one and came out as Audit the Audit. So
So you evolved.
yeah,
Well, I
it takes.
appreciate your show. I appreciate your answers, and I appreciate you explaining kind of where you're coming from, because I'm trying, like again, even with the Karens, even with your show, like I'm trying to figure out like which one. I have to watch all of it. I have to watch CNN. I have to watch Fox. I have to watch this. I have to watch that. Like just to, there's a gray line always,
Right.
somewhere in between. And so you have to kind of muddle through it and figure out what the laws are exactly. Well, I appreciate you taking my call. I appreciate you and what you're doing. And you mentioned that you might be going away sometime. That would break my heart. I hope you stick around for a while,
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for
or
calling me.
evolve into something else.
Maybe so. We'll see where it goes.
Well, do that thing that you talked about, the magnetic, so everybody has a camera. I think
Yeah,
that's a really
I'm
good
certainly
thing.
I'm certainly going to look into that. So we'll see where that goes
Okay.
as well.
All right. Thanks for taking my call.
All right. Thank you. Bye. She made a good point about having a good degree of media literacy. And this doesn't necessarily go to all the points I make here on the channel, but just speaking as a journalist, there are a lot of lazy journalists out there, and there are a lot of people who seek to create a narrative around police interactions in general. And it doesn't necessarily always appeal to the truth of the situation. And I think she made a good point about watching both CNN and Fox News. I mean, that'll give you perspective and allow you to decide for yourself what the truth is instead of being, force fed narratives that are disguised as news reports. Um, okay, I think I'll take one more call. This will be the last call, and then we will be wrapping it up. So let's see who it is. Audit the Audit here. Hello?
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 Are you
Hello,
there?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have a question?
Uh, yes. Sorry, let me just move away. I'm echoing.
It's okay.
So yeah, I had a question. I was wondering, as a huge fan of your work, it's it made me wonder what about the trust in police. And so I looked at a few polls, and to my surprise, it shows that not many people trust the police and everything. And I was wondering, like, if we create another department that would always monitor the police, like hands-on lawyers or something like that, that could be separate from the police department. Because I've seen a video of where people who file complaints just get brushed aside. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think that, there's a lot of good to be had in creating, say, civilian oversight boards or something along those lines. But once again, they're very easily corruptible, and they often, you know, have members on the boards that are very tied into the police department already. So there's no simple solution for making sure that police officers are held accountable. And I think, to take a step back from that, a better way to approach the situation would be to just educate officers better, and have them go through a much more strenuous process for being drafted into the police departments. And that may create a more diverse and more professional system that results in more people's rights being respected. So it's not necessarily, and that also is not a one size fits all solution. I think it'll take a combination of all of those things to create something that really makes an impact and changes the way that policing is done in America.
I would totally agree with that. But to go more specific details of what I was thinking, like I said, a different department altogether, far separate from police, but kind of above it. And if there was a complaint that needed to be filed on an officer, it would go to them instead of the police. An investigation would happen, and they would determine, the right and wrongs.
Right.
I also believe in, like I said, an on-site person who monitors, who does not, assist in any type of way with the police officer or the civilian. They just monitor for any civil rights or law-breaking actions from both parties. That's where I too thought of the corruption, which was why I thought to keep it separate out of the police department.
Right. And,
And
we sort of have that in a way, at a much smaller scale than what you were referring to at the moment, and that is the FBI. The FBI investigates certain federal federal level corruption. That, for example, I did a video not that long ago about an FBI agent
yes,
who was
I
arrested.
remember that.
Right, and that was
Yes.
through an FBI investigation into local departments. So that does happen to some degree. But I also agree with what you're saying, that we need a different agency, maybe even at the federal level altogether, that their whole purpose is to, investigate claims of misconduct. I think that would be a really good idea. And it's certainly something that we could afford to do.
Yes, I totally agree, because I would love nothing more than to put my tax money into that, to have people who are trained under the law and do constant law tests for their own city and state to make sure that they themselves do not, misinterpret the law or make up laws to either support either the officer or the civilian. Where if they fail to do these things, they themselves would be terminated.
Right.
It's just like my job. Every 3 to 6 months, we have to take this test to make sure that we're up to speed on what to do and what not to do. And because this is the internet, I don't want to give up what my job is.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what this training does for us is that if we fail it, we could either lose our job or not work for a while until we are given a second chance to take it. That's what I believe this department should have. Like, it should be a trust building to where we can rebuild our trust with police officers to where no one's refusing to talk to an officer. No one's refusing to call 911 and take matters into their own hands.
Right. Yeah. And
which is what I believe happened with the I'm sorry.
you're okay.
Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. And it's definitely a situation where continued training would be necessary, much like how doctors and certain other industries, like you mentioned, have to take periodic tests to evaluate their skills and continue training. And a friend of mine who's a well decorated police officer suggested that perhaps continued education and more strenuous requirements for that would improve the overall policing that happens in America. Much like you're saying, I think that there's a large consensus on this, that not just people who are regular citizens, but I think also police officers might be interested in further developing their skills. And so I don't think, I think if something like that was proposed, there probably wouldn't be too much backlash, and I think that officers would more than likely be open to getting better at doing their jobs and not having to face the civil liabilities that they face under such a high degree of scrutiny that they work in today.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And also, I think we should get our police unions in check because, in my opinion, they are the most powerful union in America. And it's kind of ridiculous. I don't know if you covered this story or not, but a police officer was terminated because she was taking someone's phone because they were filming her, and she made the claim it was for my safety. I know that's another conversation to have about police officer safety and whatnot. And the family had went through all the right steps, to complain, file a lawsuit, and everything. She was eventually fired, but then rehired. And that kind of felt like a slap in the face to not only the family that was harassed by this officer, but the community as well.
Yeah, I agree. And, I have seen, I watch a lot of videos about police encounters, and I've noticed, and this is purely anecdotal, but that whole excuse of officer safety and not being recorded has definitely diminished to some degree over the years. And it's becoming more and more common knowledge that, citizens do have a right to record the police. And I think that over time, there will be a movement more so in that direction where officers are more well informed about the fact that people are within their rights to record them. And, you'll see less and less instances like the one you're referring to now.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Thank you for taking my phone call, and I know you've got a lot of things to do, just as like I have a lot of things to do today. Keep up the good work and continue to inform us on, police interactions and their right and wrong.
Well, I'll do my best. Thank you for calling in. All right. Well, there, like I said, there's definitely a trend happening where not just in the courtroom, but also just on the street and in the practical enforcement of law, where officers are becoming more aware of the fact that people can record them. And I think you'll see that, like I mentioned, I think you'll see a trend of that becoming more and more popular of a sentiment among police officers. And more officers have moved towards this idea of drafting policies. More departments are drafting policies that specifically state that, it's okay for citizens to record you. And, of course, a lot of those policies are enforced to varying levels of degree, but it is a step in the right direction. As I mentioned earlier, this is big problems like this don't have instantaneous solutions, and it takes time to manifest corrections in such a huge industry. So it'll be good to see how this works moving forward, and it'll certainly be interesting to, you know, see how the whole industry of policing changes. Well, this has certainly been a good experience, and I had a lot of fun talking to you all. And I look forward to doing this again. We'll be setting this up to go every Sunday at 1 p.m., and I'll be sure to let you all know beforehand how this goes. And we will definitely have a mod for the chat next time. Um, I just kind of wanted to see how everyone would behave if there was a lawless society in the chat. Um, but we see that there does need to be a moderator, so it'll be okay. Uh, once again, I appreciate all of you for tuning in. I hope that this was worth your time and that you enjoyed this. And I look forward to doing it again. We'll see how it goes. Next time, on the next episode, I'll have a topic that we'll explore before we get into the questions, and we'll jump into the chat then as well and take some calls. And once again, I look forward to seeing you all and talking to you. And that'll be the end of today's ATA radio show. See you next Sunday.